They say Jerusalem has been destroyed many times, but what they never tell you is that before the walls fell, the hearts of men broke first. Before fire consumed stone, fear consumed souls. Before blood ran through the streets, it soaked into prayers whispered too late. The wind carried the smell of smoke long before the first sword struck the gate. From the highest tower of the northern wall, young Elias pressed his forehead against the cold stone and stared into the valley below. Thousands of enemy tents dotted the land like a disease spreading across holy ground. Torches burned even in daylight, and the sound of hammers echoed as siege engines were assembled with terrifying patience. This was not a raid. This was an ending. Jerusalem was tired. Inside the city, life still pretended to exist. Merchants argued over bread prices that changed by the hour. Children chased pigeons through narrow alleys, unaware their laughter sounded like a crime. Priests moved through the streets with forced calm, blessing walls they knew would not hold forever. Elias was not a soldier by choice. He had been a shepherd once, counting stars and sheep instead of arrows and corpses. But when the enemy banners appeared on the horizon weeks ago, every able hand was called to the walls. Faith would not be enough, they said. Steel must speak. At dawn, the horns sounded. The first stones from the enemy catapults slammed into the outer walls, shaking the city like an earthquake. Dust rose into the sky, and screams followed instantly. A tower cracked. Somewhere below, a man died without ever seeing who killed him. Elias loosed his first arrow with trembling fingers. It vanished into the mass below, and he did not know if it found flesh or ground. He prayed anyway, because prayer was easier than watching. Days blurred into nights. The sun rose and set over constant thunder. Each morning the walls stood a little weaker, and each evening fewer men answered roll call. Water grew scarce. Bread turned to crumbs. Hope thinned faster than supplies. Inside the city, desperation changed people. A mother traded her wedding ring for a loaf of moldy bread. A priest collapsed in the street, whispering psalms with cracked lips. Fights broke out over wells guarded by armed men who once swore to protect the people, not control them. Rumors spread faster than fire. Some said God had abandoned Jerusalem. Others said this suffering was a test. A few whispered that the city was being punished for sins buried too deep to cleanse. On the seventh night, the enemy moved closer. Under the cover of darkness, their soldiers advanced siege towers toward the walls. Flaming arrows streaked through the sky like falling stars, igniting rooftops and marketplaces. Bells rang wildly as fires erupted, and smoke turned night into choking blackness. Elias fought beside men twice his age, their faces smeared with ash and blood. He saw courage shatter in real time, men screaming prayers while swinging swords, others freezing in terror as ladders slammed against stone. When the first enemy soldier climbed over the wall, time seemed to slow. Elias drove his spear forward without thinking. The impact jolted his arms, and suddenly the man was no longer moving. Elias stared at the lifeless body, realizing with horror that this was the first life he had taken. There was no thunder. No judgment from the heavens. Only silence and the sound of more boots climbing. By morning, the outer wall was breached. The enemy poured through the gap like floodwater, unstoppable and merciless. Street fighting erupted instantly. Narrow alleys became killing grounds. Homes turned into traps. The city screamed. Elias ran through smoke-filled streets, searching for his younger sister Miriam, who had refused to flee the city days earlier, believing the holy walls would protect them. He shouted her name until his voice failed, pushing past wounded civilians and fallen defenders. Near the Temple Mount, he found her. She stood frozen beside shattered steps, clutching a blood-stained shawl that did not belong to her. Her eyes were wide, empty, reflecting flames dancing across sacred stone. Elias pulled her close as the sound of steel on steel rang around them. Above them, banners of the invaders rose against the sky. Jerusalem was falling, the city did not die all at once. It bled slowly, street by street, prayer by prayer. Elias and Miriam hid inside a collapsed storehouse near the inner wall, listening as the sounds of slaughter echoed closer. The air was thick with smoke and fear. Miriam's hands shook as she pressed them over her ears, but the screams found her anyway. Outside, the enemy moved with ruthless discipline. Soldiers kicked down doors, dragging people into the streets. Anyone who resisted was cut down. Anyone who begged was ignored. The holy city was no longer sacred, only conquered. When the temple gates were breached, a cry rose from Jerusalem that was not human. It was the sound of faith being torn apart. Elias watched from behind broken stones as flames climbed the temple walls. Sacred banners burned. Golden ornaments melted and fell like tears. Priests who refused to flee were slaughtered where they stood, their final prayers drowned by the roar of fire. Miriam whispered, "Where is God?" Elias had no answer. As night fell, the city glowed red. Blood mixed with rainwater in the streets, running along paths once walked by prophets and kings. The enemy celebrated openly, laughing as they drank from stolen cups and feasted among ruins. At dawn, survivors were dragged into the central square. Men, women, children, faces hollow, eyes broken. The victor stood above them, declaring Jerusalem conquered, its people defeated, its holiness shattered. Elias held Miriam's hand as chains were placed around their wrists. Around them, the walls still stood in places, stained dark with smoke and blood. The same walls that once promised protection now watched silently as their people were led away. As they marched out through the ruined gates, Elias turned back one last time. He saw the city not as it was now, but as it had been, sunlit streets, prayers rising at dawn, laughter echoing between stone walls. He understood then that Jerusalem was more than buildings. It lived in memory, in faith, in those who survived to remember. The enemy could destroy stone. They could burn gold. They could stain holy walls with blood. But they could not erase the story. Years later, far from Jerusalem, Elias would tell the tale to children who had never seen the city. He would describe its beauty, its suffering, and its fall. He would teach them that walls can fail, faith can be tested, and cities can bleed. But as long as the story was told, Jerusalem would never truly be silent. And the holy walls, though broken, would still whisper the truth of what was lost, and what must one day be rebuilt.